Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Draft Friday, number 57. And today I am joined by Pamela Fagan Hutchins. We're going to be talking all about how to write a crime fiction series and what you need to know to dive into this genre, which is one that I have wandered around the edges of, but haven't really ever gone into. So I'm so excited for this conversation. Thank you, Pamela, for being here today. Do you want to just give the audience a quick introduction to yourself?
Well, thank you for having me, Alessandra. And I am a crime fiction writer who's dabbled in all, flavors of crime fiction. And I live in central northern Wyoming. So the bright glare behind me is snow glare. And I have a podcast called Crime and Wine where I talk with crime fiction writers. So while I'm not very murdery in real life, I tend to be murdery on the page of my show.
Best place to be murdery. And I'm seeing a lot of hellos from different places: Los Angeles, Ontario, St. Louis. So I think you have some fellow snow bunnies. Nobody's there. But when we say crime fiction, kind of what is the definition of crime fiction? Is it fiction with crime? Is that
Fiction that's driven by an underlying crime, so that you have a reader who's asking who did it, why did they do it, and how are they going to be brought to justice? And really, it encompasses a lot of subgenres, everything from a traditional whodunit, like a mystery, to thrillers and suspense, legal thrillers, noir fiction, spy thrillers, and things like that. But things that are driven by that underlying crime.
Okay, so it's really like almost top level genre. It's almost kind of, I mean, like cozy mysteries are under crime fiction, or is crime fiction more gritty?
That is such a good question, because I think anymore, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but more and more of the cozy fiction that you read, the definition is expanded to include some grittier elements. So I don't want to say, no, it doesn't include cozy, because some of the cozy writers are getting away with some fun, gritty stuff. But it does tend to be darker and grittier than some of the more traditional cozies you would think about.
And are there any like genre expectations that we need to be aware of going into it? Like, is it typically an amateur sleuth? Is there any things like that need to fall into place, or what is the standard crime fiction novel?
I think that it can extend from an amateur sleuth who has a strong stake in solving a crime in a highly participative way. But more traditionally, it's going to be somebody that is a crime fighter or law enforcement or a crime solver. So somebody in that whole realm of whether it's a private investigator on the soft end, all the way through even, judges, prosecutors, and things like that, and your traditional law enforcement in the middle, driven by somebody with a really high stake in solving the crime.
And just so we know a little bit more about you and your process, how many books have you written, and are you a pantser or a plotter? And are all of your books in series, or are they standalones?
Well, so much in that question. Okay. So I've written 24 novels that are published, but I have 2 that are currently written and sitting and waiting in production line for a 3-book release with Bookashore Hachette. I have been in my past a pantser, but what I found is
a wild child.
When you're writing crime fiction, you can become so unhappy with yourself so quickly if you pants it. It's very plot driven. And while you can do it, you're going to spend a lot more time on the back end with the rewrite. I have become a converted semi-plotter. So I do my best, and sometimes I throw in the towel and just start writing, but I keep going back to the idea that the plot has to make sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And are most of your books standalones, or they are in series?
They're all in series in some format. I find that people in this space enjoy being able to keep going with the protagonist that is really gets them, great characters, right? And, people keep reading great characters. So anywhere from a short to 3 books to as long right now as 7, and the sky's the limit as far as how long I go in a series if people kept enjoying a good character with a good crime narrative that was evolving and driving the series.
And because you do, it sounds like the protagonist is typically someone in the field. It makes sense that they're encountering dead bodies or mysteries or that sort of thing. So,
right. I did
also,
amateur sleuth for a lot of books, and it was harder. How do I keep justifying this person encountering another murder?
yeah.
It wasn't cozy, and it was semi gritty, and sometimes you start stretching the grounds of credulity. So yeah, it's a lot easier when you got somebody in the field.
Yeah, 100%. I write psychological thrillers, and it's so hard to write in series because or domestic suspense, because what are the chances that like a normal married couple is going to come in contact with another serial killer or something?
Exactly. I
Something that-
married another serial killer with multiple families. Nope, not happening.
So let's talk a little bit about like plot versus characters, and we kind of have a question that from an audience member that is in that realm, which is how can we then as writers stay focused on our protagonists? Outlining, or by not, I think he's saying pantsing. So
Yeah.
can you walk through kind of a little bit of your process and when you're thinking about characters and when you're thinking about plot and how much pre-planning you do before you start to write?
Well, first of all, hi, Chris, and that's a great question. It is for me about becoming involved mentally with the character before I ever get to the point of outlining, and not just the character, but where they're from, so that I know what's driving them and the people around them. If you know your setting, you know a lot more about your community of potential villains as well as your protagonist and the people that might help them solve crime. And in thinking about that protagonist as I'm getting to the outline stage, I'm really thinking about something too, because I'm thinking series that's going to drive their actions over multiple books. And so that gets to what's their damage, right? What is it that brings them to the table every day to solve an old crime or a new crime and keeps motivating them, and yet also keeps haunting them and tripping them up and giving them conflicting motives and all the things that our troubled pasts, and we all have a little of it, can do. And so for me, focusing on the protagonist is really getting to know the world that they're in, their damage, their setting, the people that are going to be around them, their motivation, and then taking it from there with an outline.
So damage is a new word that I haven't really heard a lot. And are you referring to like their flaws? Or are you referring to their motivations, or what is damage?
Their past. What is it about something that has informed the character? And by that, I mean the human characteristics that they are, because of something horrible that's happened to them before. It makes them more interesting, more complex. It gives you motivations that can be very sympathetic. If, for instance, the series I'm writing right now, the protagonist, her father ran bars and was murdered before her eyes when she was 11 years old, and she was able to do nothing to stop it. And so that seminal moment in her past drives a lot of why she wants to solve crimes, which ones she wants to solve, who she feels sympathetic for, and the times in which she's going to act differently than we want her to, or that law enforcement wants her to. So it creates then some conflict with the system and herself. And so, if you can get some deep damage that drives someone into law enforcement, but yet also creates tension with it at the same time, you've got a lot to work with.
I love that. So when we're thinking about characters, we have the protagonist, and like you said, their damage, and then we also have the villain. So can you talk a little bit about when you're creating a villain, and are you also creating their damage, and kind of what that process looks like?
Absolutely. And for me, even though we may not agree with the villain's motivations, he or she has to have one for what they do. A typical crime, just straight up shoot 'em up, love, lust, loathing, loot, as motivations. But if you dive deeper into a villain that might drive your crime narrative or take you into multiple books, you need a little damage there too. And you need to know it and understand it, or uncover it slowly as you go. Everybody's got a backstory, and your villains needs to be one of the most layered and complex, at least what you know about it, when you're writing.
So you ran through what sounded like a checklist, and I only got some of it. It all started with L's.
Yeah.
So what was that you
Love, lust,
uh
loathing, and loot.
Loathing.
I'm trying to hold my fingers correctly to show the four, which are very often motivations for someone to commit the act of murder, of killing another person. Unless, well, I mean, even if they're hired to do it, then it is loot, right? They're in it for the money. But why do people kill? And those are the ones that are always rattling in the back of my head. I love you. I loathe you. I
What's
feel
the difference
lust.
between love and lust? I mean, I know the difference between love and lust, but for them to be separate categories, is it maybe just lusting after someone's lifestyle? It's not necessarily.
It can be. It
Okay.
can be lust with a capital sexy, or it can be lust with
It
it
can
being
be the traditional
jealousy
lust,
and
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas love can be towards people you're not sexually involved with
Mhm.
as well, and feel betrayed by. You know, you could love someone and feel that they betrayed you without that
Or kill for them.
or kill for
Like,
them.
right.
Right, right.
Okay. I
Fun,
oh,
it's the fun stuff.
I know. I'm so excited. Okay. And let me think if I had any other questions about villains. So obviously their motivation. And then you mentioned especially if it's over several books. So how does that work? If you have the same villain over several books, what is kind of the conclusion to the first book or second book? Are you almost catching them, then they get away and it's a cliffhanger, or what? How does that kind of
It,
plot
it
line look?
It can be the almost catching them and them getting away. It can be layers of villains. You
Mhm.
can have an ultimate villain, and that as you uncover the actor in a particular crime, it reveals to you that there is someone else pulling the strings behind that person, and that you work your way towards getting to an ultimate villain. Do you remember the series? And I'm going to refer to the television version of Bones from a few years back. I loved this series. It was let's see. I'm so bad on the fly remembering character names and things like that. But it was this.
That's okay. I've never seen the show,
Okay,
so
so
I
I could make
hopefully
it all up
I
now.
won't hurt.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But basically, she kept running into the same villain, and they would think he was dead and that they vanquished him, but he got away and he was really alive. And so you had that resolution to a
Uh-huh.
particular episode that you were looking for, or even a season, you know, if you were following a whole season, and yet you somehow lived to fight another day with that character, or he broke out of jail, or something where he kept coming back. Ultimately, I think they carried it through 3 or 4 seasons where this guy kept coming back, and it was effective. And if you think about a written crime series that way, you can do similar things. That if you get a really, really good Hannibal Lecter type bad guy, why wouldn't you want to keep revisiting that? And also, if you're thinking about ties to your underlying crime narrative, or the damage your protagonist is seeking to fix in themselves, like say they or someone else in their life was a victim of a crime long ago, and you can start, you know, taking your series in a direction where that villain may play a role in that crime as well, or one of the other villains you uncover. And so you can do some series extension this way and keep it within a world of characters that people love and love to hate.
I love that. And speaking of characters, Tiffany from YouTube said, "How big of a backstory do you write on your characters?"
Hey, Tiffany. Well, it depends. I'm a lawyer. Can you tell that answer? It depends. It just came out immediately. So to me, what it depends on is how much of that backstory needs to be in the story and at what time. So for somebody that is a major character, you're going to be doling out bits of backstory over the books, you know, till the end of time. But you maybe have a minor character that is a grocery store clerk that's always surly, and that becomes a running gag. And you just need just a teeny little bit on the surface for the reader to know enough and want to keep seeing that character, you know, maybe a sentence. But you may need to know a lot more yourself about that character to write them well. And so there's the what's not on the page. What do you know about your character? And if you're really good at not pantsing, what do you commit to writing in some sort of series Bible for yourself so that you really know those characters? And that may be a lot more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And talking about characters and what makes sense, let's talk a little bit about realistic versus unrealistic. So, and I have kind of two different paths to take on this. There's like plot lines being
Right.
realistic versus unrealistic, and how often is this amateur sleuth going to run into some, run into a brutal crime, but also like specific details of the, of the investigation, of the crime scene, things like that. So first, can we talk about plots? Like, does it ever come into mind, or is that something we should keep in mind, is how much to suspend reality when we're creating plots?
Pamela Fagan Hutchins' theory, take it or leave it, is
it depends.
Yeah, it depends. No, that you want to push the bounds, but you don't want to drive readers away by going over the edge. So I'm always like, I have a good friend that is a police chief, and he's my go-to person for read-throughs, for authenticity and for accuracy. And I always tell him, don't critique me for coming close to the edge. Just tell me when it's impossible, or tell me when you don't yet see that it's possible. And we can talk about the small, very small changes I'm willing to make it possible, because I want it to not be the everyday. If it was just the everyday, well, that might be boring, and we don't ever want to be boring. We want to look for the things with the most potential for being interesting and twisting and being on the edge.
And this question kind of applies to that. What is your editing process like? So when you get feedback, is it when in doubt, cut it out? Or, is there another formula? How extensive are your rewrites?
My process is I write a first draft, and then I go back and make it the very best I can do. And then I give it to my editor, who then will come back and tell me everything that I'm going to think about or examine. And when in doubt as to whether I'm able to maintain pace, and when in doubt as to whether it's something that we really need to know right now about that character, I cut it out. Because with crime fiction, pace is really an issue. You're looking for any book, right? You're looking for a compulsively page turning book. You want great characters, but it's a plot driven book. The series may be character driven. You may keep coming back for characters, but you need a plot that turns the page with, many cliffhangers and at chapter ends, and with twists along the way. And you have to cut things out for the sake of pace sometimes. But I am pretty stubborn when it comes to, will you change this? And it's usually, I don't want to. Make me. Please explain why. And then if it really makes good sense, then anything for the sake of a good book. I've been known to cut many thousands of words when I was headed in the wrong direction.
What is your average book length, just so we have an idea?
The series I'm writing now, 90,000 words.
Okay.
The last series I wrote was about 80,000.
Okay. So they're still pretty meaty. Yeah. You're not.
Yeah. I'm not cutting them. I'm not going the short, 65,000.
Right.
I would love to. I just can't.
I know. But I think as readers, I think readers prefer, especially, they would prefer, I think, a more complex plot with,
yes.
With meat.
I agree with that. And I'll tell you that one thing that my editors said when I turned in a book that was 105,000, she said, 100's your limit.
Okay.
that to make, and I love books that are longer than that. I'm like you, I like a complex, meaty book, but she said, there's a magic about putting it in paperback. Just stop, Pamela, save it for the next book.
And I think you can get meaty. If you can't accomplish it in 90, 100,000 words, then unless it's the Da Vinci Code, and then, you know.
Then we'll let him do anything he wants.
Then we'll let him do anything. Yeah. I love this next question from a Facebook user. Their name isn't displayed, but I had just written it down while you were talking. Can we talk about twist? So
Yeah.
how do you incorporate your twist? Do you hide your killer or victims or villains? I'm sorry. Do you outline them and put them in after? That's interesting. So how do you perform a twist?
So I'm going to take it in reverse order on those questions. And that is, if I want my life to be relatively easy in writing this book and not spend the next year writing it, because my deadlines are faster than that. My deadlines are as fast as I can deliver, and then they squeeze the next deadline down. So maybe I should slow down. But I do put them in an outline. Mm-hmm. But if I see that a book is weak in spots, then sometimes you end up going back after the fact and putting them after. As to whether I hide them or show them, I like multiple points of view. And in the series I'm writing, I have points of view that include, at least to a certain extent, the killer perspective and also some victim perspective. And I don't always want the readers to know the identity of either of those. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes you can know, and that's all right. But I tend to not reveal that until I have to. And if I can't keep their identity hidden, then I question whether it's time for that point of view to appear yet. And then you're also trying to save something for the very end. Even after you know who they are, then what is the final, twist that will come about? So as a result, sometimes I stagger timelines to achieve this.
So I don't think this is a controversial question, but
never know.
I have changed my opinion on this over the years, and I waffle back and forth on it all the time. Do you think that the reader, how do you gauge how much information to give the reader? And do you think that the reader needs to have a fair shot of figuring out the mystery or the twist on their own, or are you okay blindsiding them?
I like them to have a fair shot. The way that I look at it is there needs to be enough information in the first. I like it to be within the first chapter, that if you went back and you were like, why didn't I figure that out? And you went back and looked at it again, you could see, okay,
the clues that you missed.
Right. You didn't just spring somebody on me at the end I'd never heard of. They were there in plain sight the whole time. And I just didn't have enough information yet, or I didn't figure it out. Your protagonist isn't figuring it out either. And so I like for them to be able to figure it out in conjunction with the protagonist, but not to feel tricked. I've gotten mad before. I remember listening to a book. I'm not going to say the name because it's an author I respect, but I was listening to a book on audio while I was riding a bike. And I was so mad when I got to the point where it was something that felt blindsiding that I got off my bike and I paced around. I was like, how dare you? You wasted my time. Anyway, so I remember that experience. And because it's my personal preference, I try not to do that to people. The cat has just come to visit us. Hello, cat.
Okay, Rob from Facebook has a fantastic question. And he said, thinking about the idea of layers in a series to uncover the master villain, what are your thoughts on whether the master villain should be an unseen hand, i.e. not physically present and seen in the earlier books, or a character presented in the earlier stories where the main character doesn't yet see that person is the ultimate bad guy or girl?
I think you could do both. And I think they're both good ideas. So it can be somebody that you see in plain sight, but have no idea yet, as your protagonist does not, that they are anything but what they appear to be on the surface. But I definitely, in outlining a series, and by the way, I don't just outline the books, I outline the series to make sure that I can see where it's going, at least the next 3 books coming. So when I'm outlining the series and I'm heading down the path towards a particular villain, maybe there's somebody that we haven't been introduced to yet, but we've been introduced to the people that will introduce us to them. And we are aware that they should exist or someone like them within this setting. So I don't blindside even with those characters, but we don't have to know early in the series that they're bad yet.
I love that. We have so many great questions. We're going to try to get to all of your questions. Just so everybody knows, we do have 5 minutes left. So if you have any questions, don't hold back. And if we can't get to everyone, I apologize in advance. Peg from YouTube said, how long do you spend on the first draft?
Peg, when I first started writing, I did NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And that idea that I can do a shitty first draft in 30 days stayed with me, as did Anne Lamott's premise that you know, bird by bird, that you don't have anything to edit unless you have a shitty first draft. So I try to do them in 30 days. And so my first drafts will tend to be 50 to 70,000 words. And you know, it looks like a lot of dialogue, right? So they come back in and you're layering in the description and a little more of the backstory to get up to its full length and cutting out the things that aren't necessary. So 30 days, and that's all I give myself.
So how does that work? Do you write 5 days a week? Do you write in long bunches of time? Do you write in sprints? Kind of, what is that process?
I try to write 5 days a week, and I write in the afternoons, and I know my pace, you know, when I'm cranking, and I try to write even if it's bad. You know what I mean? Like when you're looking at it and going, this is wooden, this is stupid. Blah, 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 blah. And you keep typing. So if I'm falling behind, it's all bets are off, and it's 7 days a week, and I'm a terrible procrastinator. So that always happens the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I love that. So someone from Facebook said, what point of view do you write in, first, second, or third? I've noticed books these days have been in first. Do editors
have a preference?
Have a preference? Yeah.
It depends. And I've done both. And I've done past versus present tense to try to create different feelings in the books too. And I just try to think about the protagonist and the type of or the POV character and the type of feeling and closeness that I want to achieve. With my amateur sleuth, I tended to write in first person, and it was more chatty and you were closer in. And with my law enforcement, I tend to step back and be a little bit more third person. But, you know, you can switch up within a book. You can have a villain you're doing in first person, or a victim in first person, or things like that. And I find that the editors I've worked with have wanted third person. But domestic suspense and things like that, I think you want closer to the character. So it just really depends where you're falling in the story.
And it's funny when you said do editors. I mean, I assume this author is talking about traditional editors, and most traditionally published books are in third person, but it's changing with psychological suspense. A lot of times that's in first person. So I think and then very rarely do I see a book written in second person, but then occasionally one comes along and it's fantastic. And if you haven't read You by Carolyn Knapp, I don't know
how to say her name either.
Yeah, Kepnes. I don't know. Anyways, it's fantastic. It's what the Netflix show is based on. So anyone watching, it's a really great book to read. But it's also intimidating because I was like, oh, this is so cool. But another thing about point of view is also, I think, how much you want to hide, because you were talking about writing from the killer's point of view,
right?
And I have often written my killers in first person if I want to hide their gender.
Yeah.
So if I want to keep that a secret, moving to first person is much easier, because it's really hard to write third person and not make it obvious you're trying to hide their gender. Because then they go, why is she trying to hide their gender? This must be a female killer, you know? So I'll lean on that a lot of times.
And I loved You in the second person aspect, and I was intimidated by it. And I enjoy reading both first and third person. I enjoy writing both. I'm not as crazy about omniscient, because I find myself trying to decide if it was necessary. I'm like, wait, why did we switch? I'm not smart enough for this. Somebody make it stop. You know, anyway.
I love that. We only have 30 seconds left. So unfortunately, those are all the questions that we'll be able to cover today. But if they're interested in reading one of your books or one of your series, where would you suggest they start?
My latest release is called Bighorn. It's the first in a legal mystery or legal thriller series set in Wyoming with Jen Harrington, the protagonist. I think that's a good place to start.
Perfect. And is that wide or in Kindle Unlimited?
It's in Kindle Unlimited, and every other format except that is wide.
Perfect. And do you also teach classes or courses in this topic, or?
I do occasionally. I tend to go and do those live at the library, things like that, but I'll live stream them when I do it. So if you follow my Facebook page, you can catch the Crime and Wine podcast.
Crime and Wine. That was what it is. I'm sorry. I knew there was something I was going to mention as where they could learn more. So Crime and Wine is a podcast, and they can find it on
Pamela Fagan Hutchins Facebook page or my website, PamelaFaganHutchins.com. Every podcast source you can imagine, live streams on Facebook, YouTube, etc.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience. You had such fantastic questions today, and thank you for joining us live. And thank you so much, Pamela, for sharing all of this fantastic information
It was
about writing crime fiction.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Great questions.